What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be looking at the Stamina Warden. So the Stamina Warden and Wardens in general have kind of always been classed as or rather typed as like the lowest DPS in Magicka or Stamina DPS specs, which is really not quite the case. Stamina Wardens, generally speaking, are going to be a little bit lower on self-parses if you're not using Subterranean Assault because you don't have access to Major Fracture. But when you take into consideration the additional damage you will have from using Major Fracture, Stamina Wardens actually pull pretty much toe-to-toe with like Stamina Templars and even Stamina DKs from time to time, depending on how comfortable you are with the class. So the whole idea that Stamina Wardens and Magicka Wardens and Wardens in general are subpar DPS is kind of a myth. In the right hands, a Stamina Warden and a Magicka Warden, they are both capable of pulling very good DPS, comparable with some of the existing classes already. Is it going to be a little bit more difficult? Certainly so, and there are obviously going to be some caveats here and there with how well you're able to perform with a Warden DPS class, but they are still very strong. And they're still capable of pulling toe-to-toe with not necessarily the best Stamina DPS classes like Stamina Nightblades or Magicka Nightblades, but they can definitely hold their own to the other classes. So just like our other build videos, we'll be going over our skills, we'll go our gear, we'll talk about our attributes, our CPs, everything you're going to need to know in order to make this build yourself and be successful with it. We'll discuss our rotation, kind of what's going on in our when we do our rotation, what we want to look for, things like that, how it's all going to play out, any sort of changes you might want to make here and there. And then we'll close things off with a 6-lane dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the level of DPS you're able to pull with the Stamina Warden. So with all that said, let's go ahead and get started here with our gear. So just to start things off here, we are going with a light attack build. So we are not doing a heavy attack build like we did back in Dragon Bones. We're going all light attacks. We will still be doing at the very least one heavy attack on our front bar to help sustain ourselves, but for the most part we're going to be sticking with light attack build throughout. So starting off first with our monster helm, we have Selene's. So Selene's can be obtained from Selene's web, and we do have a heavy shoulders with a health enchant here because we are using Dubious Camoran Throne. Again, we are doing a light attack rotation, so we do need that additional health there to make up for the loss of health from using Dubious as opposed to blue food. So we do have that heavy shoulder with that health enchant there. They're both divines. If you don't want to use Selene's, you can go with the Velidreths instead. Because we are using a Relequen as our main body piece, Relequen can proc Selene while we're on our back bar, so Selene's will do a little bit more DPS compared to Velidreth if we are using Relequen. If we are not using Relequen, if we're using Twice Fang Snake, VO, or War Machine instead, in that case Velidreth will inch out ahead of Selene's by a small margin. Now if you are having trouble sustaining, you can go with Stormfist instead. Stormfist comes from Tempest Island, Velidreth comes from Cradle of Shadows. Stormfist does not add any max stamina, doesn't add any weapon damage. What it does add is stamina regen. So if you are having trouble sustaining, you might want to use Stormfist instead to get some extra sustain out of it. The downside is Stormfist is going to be a weaker monster helm overall, doesn't do as much damage as Selene's or Velidreth's, so that's kind of the trade-off you're making there. You're getting more sustain, but the trade-off is you are losing damage from that proc itself. Now, moving on ahead with our body piece. So this is the set that's going to be active on our body, so basically on both bars. So we have Relequens here, we have the perfected version here. This drops from Cloud Arrest, so you will need to have access to the Summerset expansion in order to get this set. Now you can go with perfect or imperfect, but the most important thing is to make sure that all 5 pieces are the same rarity. So you have to have 5 perfect or 5 imperfect. You can't mix and match them. I believe right now they don't count as the same set, so you won't have the set pieces. So for example, if you have 3 perfect and 2 imperfect, you get the 2-piece bonus from the imperfect, but you only get the 3-piece bonus from the perfect version. You don't get the 5-piece imperfect version of the set itself. The difference between the imperfect and the perfect version is just the addition of the max stamina boost on the 5-piece set effect on the perfected version. If you don't have access to Summerset or you don't have Relequen farmed up yet, you can go instead with any of the other minor Slayer sets. So that's going to be War Machine, that comes from Halls of Fabrication, so you will need access to Morrowind to get it. or you can go with Vicious Ophidian, which drops from all the Kra'gh trials, so you just, as long as you have the base game, you're able to get VO. Another option that I do want to mention here is going to be Twice Fanged Snake. If you're using Twice Fanged Snake, you will have to make a couple adjustments here, mainly in the Mundus stone, in order to kind of adjust for that additional penetration from using Twice Fanged Snake. Now for our second set here, we're going with the Advancing Yokeda. This is a dropped set from Helra Citadel and only Helra Citadel. It is a heavy armor set, so you will need to use the jewelry pieces and the weapons. You can use one armor piece of the Advancing Yokeda, and use a jewelry piece of Relequen or VO or whatever your body piece is going to be, and then you just have your Selene's or your monster helm basically be 2 medium pieces. That is a potential option if you want to go that route, but the safest route is to go with jewelry and weapons of the Advancing Yokeda. You will need to transmit the jewelry into these traits, so you can either go with Bloodthirsty or Infused. Any combination is going to be useful. I have 1 Bloodthirsty and 2 Infused, but you can go with 3 Infused, you can go with 3 Bloodthirsty, you can go with 2 Bloodthirsty, 1 Infused. The DPS difference between all of them is going to be pretty small overall. Infused will give you more weapon damage over the entirety of the parse, while Bloodthirsty will give you much more damage during the execute phase that lasts 25% of the boss's health. Stamina Wardens do not have an execute per se. The bear does do more damage under 25% health, but it is an ultimate and you will not necessarily be able to use the bear in all fights. So for all intents and purposes, Stamina Wardens do not have an execute. So generally speaking, you want at least 1 infused piece there, just because Bloodthirsty doesn't scale quite as well if you don't have an execute to use along with it. Now for our weapons, I have a dagger axe here, and that's just because on the PTS they don't give you 2 daggers, and I'm too lazy to basically move daggers around my different stamina DPS. So we're going dagger axe, but you can also go double dagger for more crit chance. It depends on you. If you decide to use the axe, you're basically at the mercy of the RNG gods on that axe bleed, so it's much safer to go with 2 daggers. It's going to be more consistent DPS. Not necessarily higher DPS, your ceiling will not necessarily be higher, but it's going to be a lot more consistent, and on average you'll be pulling a little bit higher with 2 daggers compared to dagger axe. On our main hand we have nirn with a poison damage enchant, and then on our offhand we have infused with a weapon damage enchant. Now we're sticking with Advancing Yokeda because, at least with this rotation specifically, we are able to maintain very good uptime on the full stacks of Advancing Yokeda. So we have really good uptime on that, which really helps out our crit chance overall. Now, if you don't have the Advancing Yokeda, you can go with a few other sets. You can go with War Machine if you'd like. If you're using War Machine, you will have to use the Bear Ultimate. If you are using Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar and Ballista on the back bar, then you won't be able to use War Machine to as great effect. So that's kind of the stipulation there. You can also go with the Ravager, which is a heavy armor set from Cyrodiil. You can obtain it from either Rewards of the Worthy or from buying coffers from Vlasterius. It's kind of up to you. So it is heavy armor set, so just like Advancing Yokeda, the ideal combination is going to be jewelry with weapons, but you can go with 1 armor piece as long as the other 6 armor pieces are also medium armor. And then finally, you can reasonably go with something like Briarheart or Acuity. They're going to be weaker compared to Advancing Yokeda or the Ravager, just due to the overall weaker weapon damage you get from Briarheart and the lower proc chance you get from Acuity. So those are a little bit weaker, but those are viable options. Briarheart is a dropped medium armor set from Hrothgar, and Acuity is a crafted set, so they might be easier to obtain compared to Advancing Yokeda and Ravager. So that's something to keep in mind there. Finally, for our back bar, we have a Maelstrom Bow, nirn. You can go with Precise if you'd like, with a Double Ravage Health Poison. Double Ravage Health Poison can be made using Fleshfly Larva, Nightshade, and then either Violet Coprinus or Nirnroot. If you have a lot of stamina and DPS in your group, typically like more than 6 or more stamina DPS, because the Double Ravage Health Poisons count as a debuff, somebody else's Ravage Health Poisons could override yours, and that ends up decreasing your DPS. I have done a couple of tests with Mayflower, looking at how this impacts group DPS, and with 4 stamina DPS at least, if we're all running Ravage Health Poisons, it is going to be a small drop in group DPS, but overall it's not that big of a loss. It's only really going to be noticeable if you are going for score, or if you have more than 4 stamina DPS in the group. So don't worry too much about playing around with that. If you do have 6 or more stamina DPS though, then it might be worthwhile to have 1 or 2 stamina DPS run an infused disease enchant on the Maelstrom Bow rather than nirn honed or precise with the double ravage health poison. But again, it's not going to really matter too much unless you are going for score or speed runs or things like that. So that's pretty much it for gear options. Now let's go ahead and move over to our character sheet. We are a Redguard here. Redguards are by far the best class when it comes, or race I should say, when it comes to stamina DPS. They get 10% max stamina, 9% additional stamina regen, and they regain 750-ish stamina every time they deal melee damage every 5 seconds, so it's really strong for sustain, and especially as a light attack build, we will need the additional sustain from Redguards if we want to maintain our rotation throughout a parse or throughout a boss fight. You do have several other race options though when it comes to stamina DPS. In the base game, you can go with the Wood Elves, the Bosmer, or the Khajiits. Wood Elves get 21% additional stamina regen, 6% max stamina, and they're also immune to poison and disease side effects. So if you get hit by poison damage or disease damage, you will not get poisoned or defile. So if you do PvP a lot on this tune, then I do suggest taking a look at Bosmer for that immunity to the poison and major defile from poison and disease damage. Khajiits, they do not get any max stamina boost. They get 10% stamina regen. In exchange for the loss of max stamina, they get 8% additional weapon crit. So Khajiits do have lower sustain overall compared to Wood Elves and Redguards, but they do have higher crit chance, so that's kind of the trade-off that you're making there. Finally, if you do have access to the Imperial Edition, you can go with the Imperials. I believe Imperials get 12% max health, 10% max stamina, and they get health back whenever they deal melee damage every 5 seconds. So Imperials have very nice survivability. The additional health basically allows you to not put any points into health. You notice that I have 10 points into health here. So if I was an Imperial, I can put all my points into stamina instead of health, and that ends up giving us a little bit more stamina overall. But just like Khajiits, we don't have any additional stamina regen, so our sustain is going to take a hit in return for that additional survivability. So for our attributes, I have 10 points into health and 54 points into stamina, and that's again because we are using Dubious Camoran Throne, because we're doing a light attack build. We don't have as much health compared to using blue food, so we do need 10 points into health in order to get up to an appropriate health level. So we're sitting at about 16.8, 16.9k health here, and that's pretty good health health-wise. Now if you do need more health, if you're feeling too squishy, then you can shift a few more points into health. I wouldn't put more than like 12 points into health. At that point, you're starting to give up a little bit too much when it comes to max stamina. One thing I do want to keep in mind is that if you are using the Ravager, because the Ravager does have max health as one of their set bonuses, you don't need to put any points into health if you're going with the Ravager. You can go with all your points into stamina if you are going with the Ravager instead of advancing Yokeda or Briarheart or something like that, and that's just because Ravager does have that health bonus there. For our Mundus Stone, we're going with the Lover in order to make up for the loss of penetration from the changes to Night Mother's Gaze and Thunder Flame. If you are going with Twice Fang Snake, you should not be running the Lover because you will end up over penetrating if you have debuff sets up. So if you are using Twice Fang Snake, you'll be running the Warrior instead. So that's kind of how that all plays out. If you do have all your debuff sets out in group, you will be going with the Lover if you're using Relequen, War Machine, or VO on your body. And then for our food, like I mentioned, we are going with Dubious Camoran Throne because we are doing a light attack build. We do get the additional stamina regen from Dubious, but we do lose max stamina and max health compared to using blue food. Now there is a gold food that you can purchase off of guild traders, or you can make yourself, Water Stain Sijic. That is basically a slightly upgraded version of Dubious Camoran Throne. The recipe is not tradable, but the food is. It is still very expensive right now because the ingredients to create the food are still fairly rare and very difficult to obtain. So just stick with Dubious Camoran Throne. The DPS difference is pretty small overall. Now going over our skills, starting off with our front bar, we have Rending Slashes. You can go with excuse me, you can go with Blood Craze if you want the additional heal. The DPS difference is pretty marginal. Cutting Dive, Deadly Cloak, Rearming Trap, Bird of Prey, and then we have Wild Guardian. You can go Flawless Dawnbreaker here if you are not able to use the Wild Guardian. The Bear So basically any fight where you can't use the pet, you will be using Flawless Dawnbreaker instead. Then for our back bar, we have Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection, Endless Hail, the bread and butter for all stamina and DPS. We have Bull Netch for the sustain, Bird of Prey, and then we have Wild Guardian. If you are not able to use Wild Guardian, then you will be using Ballista instead on the back bar. The difference in DPS between using Wild Guardian and Flawless Dawnbreaker and Ballista is pretty small. They're pretty comparable in terms of DPS, so you can go with either of them. If you are using War Machine though, you will need to use Wild Guardian, so that's something to keep in mind when you're deciding what sets you're going to be wearing. And that's pretty much it for the skills. So now let's go ahead and talk about our CPs. Now, the CP cap is 750, which gives us 250 points, which you can split across the different constellation types. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Moon Cap and 75 into Tenacity. That leaves 100 points, which you can put into the remaining nodes however you'd like. It's going to depend on which passives you want, as well as the specific trial you're running. So for example, in Halt's Fabrication, you might need to put more points into the break free cost reduction because you will be breaking free fairly often. So for me personally, I have 40 Shadow Ward, 31 Tumbling, and 29 Warlord. But again, you can kind of split them up however you'd like. Now for our blue CPs, I do want to reiterate that this is a build that is centered around having all your debuff sets active. So we have Infused Torx Crusher, we have Alkash active in group. So that's why we have 18 points into Piercing. Now if you do not have any of the debuff sets, so for example you're missing Alkash, you will need to make up that penetration somewhere. So you do want to hit the penetration cap of 18,200. So you might want to play around with sets, with CPs into Piercing in order to get up to that point. Now if you do need to put points into Piercing, you start taking points out of Mighty first. You can drop Mighty down to 56, you can drop Thaumaturge down to 51, and you can drop Mastered Arms down to 51 as well. And then you can put those points into Piercing, and hopefully that'll get you up the penetration cap. If not though, then you will need to continue to take points out of the different nodes. You can drop Precise Strikes down to 51 if you'd like. And then hopefully you'll be able to hit the penetration cap that way. So again, just try to hit the penetration cap of 18,200 using things like the Lover, Twice-Fanged Snake, put more points into Piercing, use a sharpened offhand weapon if you absolutely have to. So whatever you need to do in order to get to that penetration cap. Now finally for our red CPs. Now I like to take a one-size-fits-most approach for all my trials. However, depending on a specific trial and how comfortable you are with the mechanics in that trial, you might want to shift some CP points around in order to maximize your damage mitigation. So for example, in Maw of Lord Kra'gh, you're going to be taking more magical damage compared to physical damage, so you might want to put some more points into magical resistance versus physical resistance. For the balanced approach, we have 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Now I do want to point out one passive that you might want to consider taking. That's going to be Field Physician. When you resurrect another player, your damage taken is reduced by 15%. Now in order to get Field Physician, you will need to put 10 points or more into the Lord. If you put 11 points into Quick Recovery, you will get to the jump point and get the Field Physician passive. So that is an option for you to get. As a stamina DPS though, you will typically not be asked to res first. Typically it's going to be Magic DPS or Templars that res first. So you might not want to pick up Field Physician. It is a good idea to pick it up, especially in progression style guilds, so that way you do have that damage reduction while you are resurrecting somebody. So I do recommend picking up if you're a progression guild, but if you're like in a score running guild, then it might not be necessary to pick up Field Physician. Alright, so now that we've talked about all of the build stuff, now let's go ahead and talk about the rotation itself. So I will not be using summoning the Wild Guardian for right now, just because I don't want it to attack this dummy when we do our actual 6-mon dummy parse. So starting off here, we will be using, start off always with our buffs, so we want to make sure we have Bull Netch up, and you want to have Deadly Cloak up as well, if you can have that up before you start off. Then I like to open things up with Rearming Trap. Obviously you want to drink your potion. So this is what it's going to look like. You rebuff up first, drink a potion, do Rearming Trap, Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Poison Injection. Alright, so that's basically what the rotation looks like. So I will slow it down, the front bar rotation on this pull. So we're going to do a light attack, rending slashes, light attack, cutting dive, light attack, deadly cloak, light attack, cutting dive, heavy attack, rearming trap. And now at this point it's all going to be dependent on how much time is left on Endless Hail. So if you have around 2 seconds left on Endless Hail and you don't have your ultimate up, what I would recommend doing is going, so let's just repeat it real quick. So you can see here I have more than 2 seconds, so I can do a second heavy attack and then go to my back bar rotation. So for this rotation here, we will see that we don't have we'll have about 2 seconds left on Endless Hail, so we do a light attack, cutting dive, and then go to our back bar rotation. So again, light weave here, heavy attack into rearming trap, and then if you have 2 seconds left, if you have more than 2 seconds left, then you will do a second heavy attack into cutting dive, and then do your bar swap. If you have less than 2 seconds or 2 seconds or less, then you will do a light attack, cutting dive into your bar swap. That'll make more sense once we do our 6-minute dummy parse, so I can show you guys kind of what's going on, and I'll kind of be able to explain it to you guys what's going on. So the rotation is a little bit dynamic, but for the most part it is static. Now if you are using the bear ultimate, I like to do it on my front bar. So on the front bar, basically this is what it would look like if I had to do my bear ultimate. So light attack, rending slashes, light attack, cutting dive, light attack, deadly cloak, light attack, cutting dive, heavy attack, rearming trap, and then depending again on how much time is left on Endless Hail, if you have around like more than 2 seconds, do light attack, ultimate, light attack, cutting dive, bar swap into your back bar rotation. If you have that's if you have 2 seconds or less on Endless Hail. If you have more than 2 seconds, then you will be doing light attack, rending slashes, light attack, cutting dive, light attack, deadly cloak, light attack, cutting dive, heavy attack, rearming trap, heavy attack, ultimate, light attack, cutting dive, and then back bar. So again, when we do our parse, I'll narrate that when I see it happening, so you guys will know what's going on through my mind when we're doing it, when I decide when I have to do that. If you're using Ballista and Flawless Dawnbreaker, obviously you'll be using Ballista as your damage ultimate, so you would be basically doing Endless Hail. You do Endless Hail, Caltrops, Ballista, and then Poison Injection. So Poison Injection will always be the last skill you use on your back bar. You will bar swap out of Poison Injection, so hopefully you get that first tick on your front bar, so you get the weapon damage snapshot on the front bar rather than your back bar. Right. And so you can use Bird of Prey if you would like. If you do use Bird of Prey, that would be on your back bar, not your front bar rotation. That's kind of up to you if you want to use Bird of Prey or not. It can be situationally useful. You will, in a raid, get Minor Berserk from Combat Prayer, so it's not going to be absolutely necessary. So for this parse, I will not be using Bird of Prey. Again, Bird of Prey is going to be more situational for me. If I do need to use it, it's going to be because I need the mobility in order to move out of mechanics or something like that. Let's go ahead and summon our bear, and we'll do our 6-minute dummy parse so you guys get an idea of the DPS we'll be able to pull. So do keep in mind we don't have major fracture, we don't have minor fracture here, so we will add in 10% additional DPS at the end when we do our combat metrics report to kind of simulate what would happen if we did have major fracture, and then to compare it to the Stamplar, because Stamplars have minor fracture but not major fracture, we'll add 2%, so you'll be able to compare it to Stamina Templars that way. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started with a 6-minute dummy parse, and like I said, I will try to narrate throughout it so you guys get an idea of what's going on when we're doing our parse. So we always heavy attack into Rearming Trap. So we are going to do 2 heavy attacks here because we have more than 2 seconds left. And that was on Endless Hail. So now we have less than 2 seconds, so we'll light weave, bear ultimate, light weave, cutting dive, and then go to our back bar ultimate, back bar rotation. Again, we have more than 2 seconds, so we do a heavy attack into cutting dive there. So we do 2 light weaves here. So the general rule of thumb is, what I found is you do basically alternate between how many heavy attacks you do. You'll typically do 1 with 2, and then the next one after that's going to be 1, and that's just because of the way the Bull Netch timing lines up. If you have to cast Bull Netch on the back bar, then you typically will not have time to do 2 heavy attacks. But if you don't have to cast Bull Netch on the back bar, then you do have time to do 2 heavy attacks. Did run out of stamina there at the end. So if you are running low on stamina, you can let Endless Hail drop off for a little bit and do 2 heavy attacks. Alright, so there we go. That is our parse there. So you did notice I did lose stamina towards the end there. If you do happen to run across that in a trial or in a parse in general, then you can stick with the 2 heavy attack rotation, and it's basically would be just heavy attack, Rearming trap, heavy attack, cutting dive every single time you're on your front bar rotation. You will still, or if you have to do the bear ultimate, you do heavy attack, Rearming trap, heavy attack, bear ultimate, light attack, cutting dive. So that's how I would do the 2 heavy attack. If you want the additional sustain, you will lose a little bit of DPS if you decide to go that route though. So very similar to like Stamina Templars, where you can go 1 heavy attack front bar or 2 heavy attack front bar for additional sustain with a slight loss in DPS. So this is our parts here based on combat metrics. You can see we have better uptime on Berserking Warrior compared to other DPS classes. We're sitting at 93% uptime, and that's because we really only have 4 abilities on our back bar rather than the 5 or even 6 global cooldowns that we have to use on some classes. So that's why Berserking Warrior is a little bit higher here compared to some other classes. So really nice to have up here. You can see here that Endless Hail Razor Caltrops are very strong overall, very strong dots. Cutting Dive deals a pretty good amount of DPS as well, so Cutting Dive is very important to maintain. It's a very, or rather it's a good, very good spamble, so that's very nice there. You can see the bear does a good amount of damage, so Swipe is the bear's normal attack, and then you have Crushing Swipe, which is the occasional heavy attack, and then Guardian Savagery is the ultimate attack. So you can see here that the ultimate does hit very hard. You had a crit for about 36.7k, and this will only go up when you have things like Major Force and Warhorn active as well. And so that's pretty much how everything kind of falls in line here. Selene's, you can see here, procs fairly often, and as a result deals a lot of DPS, so almost 2k over 2k DPS here on our parse here. Alright, and we're going to take a look at debuffs out. You can see here that we did drop Relequen a little bit here, and that's mainly because we had the time to build up towards the beginning there, and that's why it's at 84 and not 100% uptime. So that's pretty much all that you see here. Now we did pull 40.6k DPS, so if we add about 2% additional DPS to compare to Stamina Templars, 2% of this would be about 800 additional DPS, so we would be pulling about 41.4 if you want to use that to compare to Stamina Templars, so it's about even with Stamina Templars. And then with Major Fracture we would add in another 10%, so 10% of this is 4k, so we'd be sitting at about 44.6k if we had Major Fracture but not Minor Fracture. With both of them combined we'll be sitting at about 46k. So you can see here Stamina Wardens are pretty much on par with Stamina Templars, so they have pretty much bring very similar utility when it comes to what they offer to the group. With the Bear ultimate, they all have a cheap way of cheap ultimate, so they're able to proc War Machine fairly often. The downside is, of course, they can't provide Power of the Light at all, so that's kind of a downside there. You can also replace Bird of Prey with something like Subterranean Assault for an AoE Major Fracture, so Stamina Wardens do have that going for them as well, and the AoE Major Fracture is very nice to have on trash pulls to make them go a little bit faster. So that's it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about this build, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I will try to get back to them as soon as I can. That's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.